For the last 15 weeks, the podcast has been Inside the Signal. What it is, where it lives, why it runs, what it takes to shift it. Here's something I didn't name in the last 15 episodes. Sometimes when the pattern finally loosens, people don't immediately feel free. They feel unanchored. Their anxiety is better and the baseline is different. And maybe that ordinary Tuesday costs less. And then a question appears. What do I actually want? Not what am I supposed to want? Not what would make me feel safe, nor what do I need to fix, but what do I want to move towards? What is calling from the inside? And I've come to think there's a reason that question appears when it does, and it has to do with what the signal actually is, which is a kind of tuning or a frequency or a vibration. It's a quality of organization, a way the nervous system is set up to meet experience. And some of it is things that we've had imposed upon us by our family, by our ancestry, by our heritage, by society. What the signals series was tracking, without ever calling this, was a particular tuning, and one that our systems learn and we take for granted, actually. And once you begin to recognize that, that opens things up. What became harder to assess when the system learned to organize around protection or something familial? What is the system capable of when your range returns? Knowing what you're no longer afraid of doesn't automatically tell you what you want to move towards. And the map of the wound doesn't give you the map of direction. Today on the Ask Dr. Gill podcast, I want to talk about what is underneath that. So stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Ask Dr. Gill. I am your host, Dr. Gil Winkelman. And today on the podcast, I want to look at the aspect of what's beyond that signal. And we're going to get to that in a minute. But before we do, I want to show you what I mean by what I'm talking about. Let me show you what I mean before I define it. We have two people, same room, very similar situations, and someone says something kind to each of them. One person, the kindness lands and they take it in. And there's a moment of contact, which is brief and it's real and it's also unremarkable, and they move on. The other scans it, not deliberately, and it's not necessarily by choice. The kindness arrived and this system immediately runs a question. What does this person want from me? What's the risk here? What am I going to owe? The kindness doesn't land. It just triggers some kind of assessment. It's the same external world, but there's a different organization or a different tuning. Here's another example. Two people face genuine uncertainty. A new job, a new relationship, a situation without a clear outcome, or something that's really unfamiliar and different. One experienced the uncertainty as a possibility, something to stay curious about. The not knowing is information rather than the threat. The other experiences that as danger, and the system organizes around what it's going to go wrong before anything has gone wrong. The uncertainty activates a scanning. Same situation, different organization. One more example that I'll give from my personal life is sharks. A lot of people on this island are terrified of sharks. They won't surf. I love surfing, nor am I really afraid of sharks. But I'm not going to do something stupid, which is to go surfing by myself in an area that's really sharky, or go surfing right when there's a shark attack happening, because that we do get notifications about this. It's the ability to experience a situation and make a decision about it without being ruled by what that experience is. And the difference is, I will say, attuning. And in this series, I'm going to use the word frequency for the quality of organization. I also might use vibration, just so you know. Now, I want to be really clear that this isn't something that we would call a measurable biological frequency per se, though we might get into that in terms of some of the research that came out of the HeartMath Institute. But for now, we're just going to talk about a way that the pattern organizes, a way that the system is set up to meet experience. Frequency is the language I'm using for this tuning. Clinically, what matters is how much range the system has. Can the frequency shift? And I'll go back to the shark example. You can be afraid in the moment that there are sharks in the water and still move forward knowing that generally you're safe, right? We do this all the time with our lives. And, going back to that example, you have a way greater chance of dying in an automobile accident than dying in a shark attack, right? We've attuned ourselves to the normality of driving. We have not attuned ourselves to the normality of being in open ocean waters, right? And I think that's part of the difference. That's part of the tuning. And, the signal series was tracking one particular shift. And that shift is how do we shift towards protection? What that shift looks like, how it runs, what it costs, and what it takes to recognize it. But here's the part that matters next. A system doesn't only organize around what's protecting you from. It organizes around what it expects to encounter. If you expect rejection, for example, you'll organize differently than if you expect welcome. If you expect abandonment, you organize differently than if you expect relationship. If you expect danger when you become visible, you organize differently than if you expect recognition. When we talk about the signal, we're not only talking about what the nervous system has learned to protect against, we're also talking about how it has become less able to recognize, receive, and move forward. Now, this series begins with a different question. The world didn't create a malfunction. It shifted what the system organized around. Humans have capacity for all kinds of things. We can have capacity for war and fighting, but we also have capacities for connection and exploration and desire and reciprocity and protection. Adversity often narrows our frequencies and our range, particularly in certain contexts. For many people, early experiences of reaching toward connection and finding it conditional, or it was withdrawn, or it was painful or unavailable, will organize around that. The system didn't break, right? It's not a broken system. It's an adaptive system. It organized around safety. Protection became the dominant organization, not the only organization, because most people can access connection in some context with some people some of the time. But the default is the starting position. And the tuning the system returns to when conditions are ambiguous or stress arrives. And this is something worth naming. Attuning can make perfect sense in the environment where it was learned and became costly when the environment changes. The system wasn't stupid. It learned something useful. The problem is that the old organization persists after the original conditions have passed. Now, here's where I need to be precise, because it would be easy to see or easy to hear protection bad, love good. It's not what I'm saying. Protection isn't pathological. Sometimes the alarms are accurate. Going back to the shark example, I've been in the water and felt something like I need to get out, right? That's a protective mechanism. That's an intelligent system, right? But sometimes sometimes leaving is the healthiest response available. The problem isn't the system learned to protect itself. The problem is that the range of expression became narrower. And that's the frequency shift, not from good to bad and not from love to fear. From a system that has range, that can contract or expand depending on what the situation calls for, to a system that is primarily organized around one response. And that's what we're going to look at in this series. Healing isn't replacing one frequency with another. It's restoring a range, right? And it's not returning to who you were before the wound, nor is it achieving some permanent state of openness, although that would be amazing without eliminating the protective qualities, right? But it's more about, can you get a better range of frequency, right? And the classic example of this is falling in love, right? Because for the romantic phase, which usually is about 1 to 2 years, everything is amazing, right? And the little things don't bother you, whether it's the person who cuts you off or your partner. And after that, something shifts. The little things start bothering you. In fact, sometimes what happens is the little things that person does really, really bother you. And it's like nails on a chalkboard. And you're wondering, who is this person? They didn't used to do that. Well, it's not that they didn't used to do it. You just didn't react to it the same way. This is how the frequencies shift, right? And the relationship can become an opportunity to grow frequencies. And hopefully it becomes that. And we'll talk about that in this series. Now, so what is the other side of protection? And I'm going to call it love. And I want to be careful about what I mean, because it's not just romantic love. And love in this series is not just a feeling or a relationship status or a mood that strikes you. It's not a permanent state of openness necessarily, but it is a capacity. And that capacity to remain in relationship with something that matters, whether it's yourself, someone else, an experience, a desire, a commitment, without immediately reorganizing your life around a protective piece, right? Think of it as an expansion. It's an expansive quality that we have, right? It's expansive frequency as opposed to a contractive frequency. Now, notice what the definition doesn't say. I'm not saying love means opening or staying or means warmth or ease or absence of difficulty. Sometimes love is saying no or leaving or protecting and sometimes love is the hardest possible thing held with the most possible care. Love isn't the elimination of protection. It's about having a greater range of frequency and response. And because I need a word for this quality of organization, I'm going to use the language of frequency. Not because love is necessarily measurable, though we will get into that in another podcast, but because the metaphor captures something important. The system can become more or less available to connection. Desire, mutuality, presence, care. That's the frequency of love, or what I'm calling love. A quality of organization of the system that makes certain capacities more available. Connection, belonging, desire, presence, commitment, and the orientation towards something larger than an immediate self-protective response. These aren't only things you feel, they're capacities that become more or less available depending on how the system is organized. A system with more capacity for connection has more ability to notice, to receive, to remain present with it. Not because the body reliably knows the difference between what is safe and unsafe, because it doesn't always. The body responds before the mind has caught up. Learning to listen to it is different from learning to obey it. But a system with range has more to work with. It can assess options better. It can look at the data differently. Over the next set of episodes, we're going to examine different dimensions of the capacity. And part of that inquiry is going to look at what becomes possible when the system is no longer organized exclusively around protection. What did I learn love would cost me? What do I actually want? Can I receive love without being needed? Can I stay with myself? Can I tolerate love becoming ordinary? What becomes possible when protection stops being the first response? Each of those questions is an episode, and each is a different dimension of the range. So one distinction before we close, because I think it matters for everything that's going to follow. Understanding identifies the shift. Experience, though, changes that tuning. With understanding, we can learn what happened. It can name the frequency that the frequency the system is in and why it was in it, and maybe what we learned from it, which, by the way, is very valuable. The Signal series was doing that work. This series is continuing it. But lasting change usually requires experience. And usually with our nervous systems the way that they are, it requires repeated experience. Relational experience, embodied experience, being present to ourselves, something that creates a different response. And enough of those experiences will do that. Understanding begins the work, and experience is what allows for the system to update. The Signal series taught you how to recognize the protective tuning. This series maps what the system is organized toward when it isn't organized around protection or wounds. And understanding the map is useful, living it is different. For 15 weeks, the Signal arc asked, what is the pattern and why does it run? Now we're going to look at what capacities become harder to access when protection became the dominant organization. That question doesn't have one answer. And we're going to go through the different ways this happens over the course of the coming weeks. What the different capacities involve, what the system does with them, and what the restoration of the range to move toward them actually requires. Now, I'm going to let you know this podcast is about recognizing the map, and you will be given stuff to do the work on your own. I also have Rewrite the Signal, which is a way to change the pattern and do the work of this podcast. And that you can find more information in the show notes. I have a link to that workshop series. And if you want to also experience in person, I will be doing another workshop called Unsettle with a dear friend, Jody Snyder, in Lanikai. It's a on-site, you can stay there. We do have some rooms available on it. I don't have dates yet. We're looking in November right now. And if you're at the point where you understand the pattern and it's still running, Rewrite the Signal is a structured container for that starts September 12th. Later this year in Lanikai, we're doing that weekend built around experimenting with what becomes possible when the system has more range and how to get into that contraction, expansion experience as well. Now, next week, we're going to talk about fear contract. We're going to talk about that specifically, how fear contracts and love expands, and what the polarity actually means clinically, and why expansion doesn't always feel the way you expect it to. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you listening, and I love doing this. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so. And also, if you have friends that might benefit this, send them this way as well. I'd really appreciate that. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time.